Greetings, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and welcome back to another video. Recently, I was made aware of this new-ish TikTok house called the Bop House, which is a house where a group of young women live, and all of these women are influencers with a very large following, and they all make not safe for work content on OnlyFans. So they all live together, they all make TikToks together, they all promote each other, etc. And I was only recently made aware of this because someone told me that recently they had a bit of a scandal where they were making some content with a minor, with someone who was 17. Not their not safe for work content, but they had invited her into this house and were using her to promote themselves and vice versa, which is obviously a little bit concerning. And upon deep diving into this, I got a little bit sidetracked. I discovered there is a new mini docuseries about this 17-year-old, and it is called Bad Influence: The Dark Side of Kidfluencing. And so I watched this and I started deep diving into this instead. And whilst watching this mini docuseries, I ended up writing several pages of notes and getting so incredibly mad and upset and frustrated. And so this video is actually not the video I was initially intending on making today. I'm not going to be talking about the Bop House today. I am going to be talking about this mini docuseries and kidfluencing and parents who have children who are influencers, etc. And I will instead be talking about the Bop House and this other TikTok house that has popped up recently next week. So if you want to hear more about that, then stick around for that. They are kind of interconnected at a point, and you will see why that is later on. So if you would like to watch that, then do not forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notifications so you do not miss it. With all that, let's get into talking about some kidfluencing, as it is apparently called. As we know, YouTube has recently turned 20. YouTube has been around for 20 years, which is wild because that's both a really long time and also really not that long at all in the grand scheme of things. And I am 25, so I have watched YouTube through every single step. I watched it be created, and I have watched it go from people just uploading 2 or 3 minute videos of just not really anything at all into people uploading skits and going through vlogs and just life updates and animations, etc. And this massive growth into the absolute monster that it is today. I have been watching YouTube as my main source of content consumption since I was about 7, which was right at the beginning. So I have truly just watched it do everything until here we are now. And YouTube is such an incredible platform because it does allow for creativity to flourish, right? The digital age is a very mixed bag of pros and cons, obviously. And one of the big pros of the digital age is that everyone can do something. Everyone has the potential to be seen, to be heard. Everyone has the potential to turn their creativity into a career. And that is something that YouTube is so fantastic for. You can find videos about just about anything. So people are able to create things that they enjoy, and then people are able to find things that they enjoy. There are so many niches. There is so much content for literally everyone. And YouTube has become a source of income and a career for so many people, myself included. And I think it is so cool that you can do that just off of something you enjoy doing. And it's also a hobby for a lot of people as well. It brings a lot of just joy to a lot of people, as well as being a wonderful education resource. And there's very few restrictions. But the con of this, as I said, pros and cons for all of this, is that there aren't very many restrictions. And where there are no restrictions, there is always going to be people who abuse the system. We always look for relatability in the content that we consume, right? This is something that we all know. This is why we are always talking about representation in the media and diversity, etc., because it is so important to be represented and feel represented and also just relate to the content that you are consuming and how it reflects you and how you're moving through life. And that goes for not just, like ethnicity and body shape and abilities, etc. It also works for age and how old you are and where you are at in your life, which is why in kids content, so like in Disney Channel shows and kids movies and young adult fiction, kids books, etc., the characters are always around the same age as the target demographic. If you're reading like a middle grade book like Percy Jackson, he's 12 because the market is 12-year-olds. You're reading The Hunger Games. Katniss is 16 because the target audience is teenagers. You are watching Hannah Montana. She's like 12 through to when she's, I think, 18 because the target demographic is teenagers. And because kids are such big consumers and kids are such a large percentage of the audience of consumers on YouTube, people have figured out that, a good way to provide for that market and therefore make money off of that market is to make content for kids. And the best way to make content for kids is to have it be made by kids. The rise in children, like young kids being the center of content, started with things like family vlogging channels because, vlogging was a big thing because of that connection that people have, like just living life with someone. People enjoy like going through life with people and just having that like parasocial relationship sort of dynamic. And so parents started to take advantage of that and realize that, people love kids. Firstly. And if they're showing like their lives and vlogging with themselves and their kids, they are appealing to a large audience because they're appealing to parents, they're appealing to kids, they're appealing to everyone because there's so many different people who are represented and thus find relatability in this content. And with family vlogging, it, shows every aspect of a kid's life, getting ready for school, going to the park, hanging out with friends and family. It's showing all of these parts so that the audience can feel close to them and find that relatability in that. And then it starts to veer off a little bit as they try to keep it interesting. So they bring in new people and they start to tell their kids what to do and how to act on camera until reality and performance become so blurred that kids can't really separate the difference because they are living their lives on camera and growing up in front of millions of people and doing exactly as their parents ask and becoming the person that they are being forced to be in front of people, which is, so fun. We love that. And alongside family channels, there is a different type of kids content for kids, which is for kids by kids. How many times can I say kids in this video? Oh my god. Which is effectively just kids being kids on camera. It's them like dancing and playing and hanging out, going and doing fun things that like maybe they don't normally get to do, like going and getting their nails done with their friends, going to Disneyland, just having fun with their friends and filming it and uploading it on the internet for anyone to watch. The like hanging out with your friends and playing with your friends is obviously normal, good, fun stuff for kids to be doing, and they should be doing that. The filming and uploading it on YouTube maybe should be done a little bit less. But obviously, instead of just not doing that and just letting kids be kids not on camera, these kids are directed by their parents. Their parents are filming this content and uploading this content so they can make money off of what their kids are doing by honing in on the large audience that is going to be consuming this content. And because of that, much with the family vlogs, they have to start making it interesting. They have to start doing different things because there are more and more people catching on to the fact that this is a way you can get attention. This is a way you can make money. So more and more parents are setting their kids up and doing this and starting these channels. And so you have to be different. You have to stand out. You have to do more. Always more, because you need the biggest audience and you need people to keep tuning in and not turning away to choose a different person to watch. So we end up with things like The Squad. The Squad was created in 2017, 2018, and it is a group of children aged 11 to 13 at the time who effectively lived together and would make content for each of their respective YouTube channels. They would make them together, they would make them by themselves, but ultimately they were like all together making videos with someone at any given point. And this group, this squad, revolved largely around one girl in particular named Piper. And Piper has been a social media influencer since 2014 when she was like 9 years old. She has had a lot of public attention on her since that time, and it has only continuously grown. So in 2017, 2018, her mom came up with the idea to really push on this and continue to make it bigger and bring in more people. So she decided to audition people to start making content with her, which is how the squad was formed. So each kid had to audition to be a part of it and had their own channel created, and then they were able to join this big content house thing and start making content together to work off of each other and build their own channels whilst building all of their channels at the same time. A little important background here is that Piper has always been used by her mother to perform and to get attention and money. Her mom started putting her in pageants when she was 3 years old, and then the second that social media became like available as something that she was able to post on, she was there. Her mom has been pushing her to be in things and in front of cameras literally her whole life. She was already racking up a ton of followers on Musical.ly when she was 9 years old, and then her mom put her in like a YouTube brat show when she was a little bit older, and that's where she met the first squad member. She never sent Piper to school, so she never got like a formal education because her mom said it was more important to help her grow her social and performance skills. So like, you know, who needs school if you are just living in front of a camera and on social media all the time? Obviously, it's totally fine to deny your child of an education for that. As I said, every single person who came into Piper's life is someone who has auditioned to be there. The only person who did not audition to be in her life is the person she met on set for this brat show that she was in. Every single other person who came into her life is someone who auditioned to be in her life. And although a lot of the friendships she formed in the squad were genuine, I don't think you can ever get past the layer of knowing that they're only there for a job. Like the thing that brought them there was specifically what they could gain off of you. So even though the friendships were genuine, that is always going to be there. And that is every relationship she has ever had, which must be so incredibly isolating. The squad had an incredibly rigorous schedule. They would wake up at 6 a.m. and then do 3 hours of online school before going to the squad house, where they would film content from 11 a.m. all the way until 1 or 2 a.m. And then they would go home and sleep from 3 to 6 to do their 3 hours of school and start over. So these kids who were 11, 12, 13 years old were getting 3 hours of sleep a night. They were only doing 3 hours of school, and then they were spending 14 hours a day working. 14 hours a day working. And a lot of the time they weren't given lunch. Like they were barely fed. And they spent all that time on camera till 2 in the morning. And this was 7 days a week as well. 7 days a week, these kids were working 14 hours a day and only getting 3 hours of sleep. Obviously, there's a lot to say about their parents and their parents' involvement in this, but I will be getting to that shortly. Don't you worry, we will be coming around and talking about the parents in a minute because I can already feel the rage bubbling up inside me and I am more than ready to let it all spew out. But we've got to hit a hold on that for a second because there is unfortunately more to this. The content that they filmed in this house for the 14 hours every single day was orchestrated by Tiffany, Piper's mother, and her boyfriend, Hunter. So what initially started as just like, you know, kids hanging out and kids having fun became so much more than that and so much more intense and fake, where Hunter and Tiffany spent a lot of time researching the algorithm and looking at what was popular, trying to decide what was going to get a lot of clicks, what was going to get views, what was going to bring in the most amount of money. And so they would go through and look at what's popular, and they would directly just copy videos that were existing, or they would build off of them and make them more interesting. And they just did whatever they thought was necessary in order to bring in the largest amount of viewers. And it didn't matter what that meant for the kids as long as it got views. They're already working the kids 14 hours a day. So we already know how much they care for their well-being, you know? One of the things that they would do was they auditioned people to join the squad. So they had more people come in as crushes. They would build these fake relationships between these children. I'm just going to keep reminding you that they are like preteen children. They audition people to come in and pretend to like each other, to build up relationships, where they were like playing skits and stuff of being like, oh, I really like her. Should I like take her on a date? What do you think? Oh my God. And really, really playing up the idea of kissing. That was mentioned so much, of being like, maybe we'll get to kiss. Maybe I'll get to kiss her. And using that as clickbait as well. Like there were a lot of videos titled with like first kiss in all caps in the title. The kids on camera being like, oh my God, this is gonna be my first kiss. I'm so nervous. And that's so sad for a whole number of reasons. This is obviously incredibly problematic. We know who's watching these videos, right? Like we're aware. And so are the parents whose kids are involved in this. They can sit here and say the content's for kids, it's all innocent fun, it's all just content for children, but we know the other demographic of people who are searching up little girls kissing. We know the demographic of people who are looking for first kiss in the title and seeing 12-year-olds and clicking on that video. But obviously it's so much better for these parents to just turn away and not care about that because, you know, they're getting money. So like, what does it matter? So that's a reason why it's obviously incredibly problematic. But something else about it that makes me so incredibly sad is that these were not real relationships, right? Like obviously the child audience who are watching this genuinely believe all of this because they believe everything on YouTube is real. And so the kids are eating it up. But the people in the videos, these kids in the videos, they've never had relationships before. They've never kissed people before. This is like, it's all fake and they have to pretend that it's real. And they're out here truly, literally having their first kiss, which is a big deal. You know, like that's a big deal. And they're having that completely taken away from them to do it for a YouTube video. They are having these fake relationships and giving away all these firsts that most kids are so, you know, giggly about and like excited for. And they're having that taken away from them for the sake of content. And that just makes me really, really sad. Circling back to what I was talking about a moment ago, where I was like, the parents try to convince themselves it's all for kids. But you would wish that was true. Not really, actually. It's bad to be ignorant as well. Like being willfully ignorant when it comes to the safety of your children is absolutely not okay. But they also actually can't even claim to be unaware of this factor. These parents know what's going on. They are fully aware and they have actual proof of this happening. Because one of the mothers of the squad members, not Tiffany, a different mother, also lived in this house with her kid. So the kids didn't all live there. They lived in their own houses, but obviously they were working till 2 a.m. some nights, so they stayed over quite a lot because, you know, going back and forth at 2 a.m. is not ideal. They were all aware that there is an older man who not only watches this content, but regularly engages with it. In particular, with Piper. He would leave a lot of comments on all of her posts. He would send gifts, like anything that she wanted, he would send. Laptops, designer bags, like phones, whatever she wanted, this older man would send that to them. He would call the house. He would have conversations with this child that her mother was aware of and that was facilitating because she's a terrible person, but again, we'll get into that soon. So these mothers, these parents were all aware that there was an older man who was consuming this content that their kids were involved in and who knew the address and phone number of the place where some of these kids were living and where they were all regularly spending time. And one of the mothers, when bringing this up, said that on her daughter's account, she blocked him and was like, I thought I could protect my kid from that. Firstly, he has your address. He has your phone number. He's watching your daughter in the other kids' content. You also have to be aware that he is not the only one that is consuming this. And also, one last final thing. Okay, cool. You think you can protect your kid, which you aren't trying hard enough considering she's still living here and you're still letting her be in all this content. But what about Piper? Like, you aren't doing anything to stop this from happening to her or to any of the other kids. You're just like, damn, too bad that it's happening to these others. I'm not going to do anything about it though, because like, I'm really benefiting from this situation. But like, I've blocked him, so now I feel better about myself. Not good enough. Not good enough. How fucking dare you? On top of this, a mother who lived in the house was the stylist for these kids, and Tiffany started telling her, like, hey, you've got to get sluttier clothes. You need to start getting sluttier clothes for these 12-year-olds. They need to show more skin. They need to show more cleavage. You've got to start, like, upping that. And she said, I knew it was wrong, but I what can you do? I couldn't do anything. Yes, you can. You can just not buy the clothes anymore. Like, you still went and bought the clothes that she asked for. You still went and bought those sluttier clothes. You were still buying revealing clothes for your children to be wearing on the internet where you knew there were predators watching and consuming it. You still did it. I knew it was wrong, but like, what could I do? You could stop and you could pull your kid out of the house, but she didn't. She also designed the thumbnails where Tiffany told her to make their boobs bigger, make their waist smaller, give the guys more muscles because sex sells. She told them to like take shots where you could see more skin, like showing a bra, because sex sells about these children. And this mother said, and I quote, "You know it's not right, but you can't say anything." And my direct response to that is, yes, the fuck you can. Yes, you can. You say, hey, absolutely the fuck not. That's not okay. I'm taking my kid. I'm getting the fuck out. And I'm calling Child Protective Services on you. And I am going to relay this word for word and show them examples of what you are subjecting these children to. Because you have literal physical evidence of it. And if that isn't enough, one of the girls went home and asked her mother, hey mom, why do grown men like smelling underwear? To which this mother found out that Tiffany was allegedly, all of this allegedly, was selling Piper's underwear to older men in order to get money. And when this child asked her, what are you doing? She said, oh, older men like sniffing underwear. So this kid asked her parent about it. And when her mother confronted Tiffany, Tiffany was like, get over it. Stop being such a prude. It's fine. It's literally no big deal. And did this mother then take her kid out of the situation and go as far away as she possibly could? Nope. She kept sending her kid back because if she pushed it anymore, her kid would be punished by not being allowed to be in Piper's videos anymore. And we can't be having that. What a tragedy that would be. Her kid wouldn't be able to get as many views for a period of time. And that would be a true tragedy. So we better keep sending her back to this house of horrors where kids are being sexualized and interacting with literal predators. Because at least they're getting views. We don't want to be losing that. These 12-year-olds really do need to be out here getting millions of views so that their parents can keep earning money. The parents aren't the bad guys here. Tiffany is. Tiffany is the bad guy. None of the other mothers. Just her. This docuseries is quite literally one of the most frustrating things I have ever watched. I didn't specify before, but like all of this information I've just spewed at you is stuff that I got from the docuseries and from just doing a little bit of my own research as well. And it's so frustrating just because it's portrayed as trying to be something that raises awareness for kids who are influencers, for children who are being used for content. And you can tell that by the title, Bad Influence, The Dark Side of Kidfluencing. But that is not how a majority of it came across. How it really came across was that being a child influencer is totally fine. Using kids to create content and monetize their lives and working them 14 hours a day, that's totally fine because it makes you a lot of money. They said over and over how much money was being brought in. They were reiterating time and time again, like, this is how much money these kids were earning. Look how much money they were earning. This is how much money you were earning. And they never said that being an influencer was bad. The entire thing was just them being like, Tiffany was a bad person. Tiffany was a monster. Tiffany was hurting these kids. And that was all coming from the mothers of the kids who were involved. The children who were involved were speaking about their experience and were very obviously hurt and traumatized, and they were much more honest than their parents were. And then anytime there was any actual conversation about the dangers of this industry, it was by industry professionals, but they never went into it deep enough to where it was like actually really good and well thought out. And overall, like, it was just talking about how bad this one person in particular was. It was talking about really like, it's fine for your kids to be influencers. You just have to be aware that there's bad people out there. And it's so frustrating because, like, yes, this woman does deserve to have her actions called out. What she did was terrible and it does deserve to be talked about. And I think that, like, it should be publicized. And I think, you know, someone needs to go in and get Piper into a different situation. But it's so missing so much of the point, and it just comes across as these mothers being jealous. It feels more like jealousy than anything else. And this shows a lot with the lawsuit that they filed, and I will get into that shortly. But for the moment, we are going to go a little bit deeper into these mothers and what they were saying in this docuseries and how mad it made me, because it really needed to focus so much more on the actual horrors of kidfluencing, and it really needed to call these mothers out on their bullshit. It did a little bit, but like barely. These moms are still playing victim, and they are acting as though they did nothing wrong and that they are great parents and, you know, they got their kids out and it was so hard for them, and it boils my fucking blood. These mothers, because fathers weren't involved in this documentary really at all. They were never mentioned. I don't know where any of the dads are. I know Piper's dad left before she was born, and there was one other dad who was involved and made the situation worse. But other than that, no dads were mentioned. These were all mothers. So that's why I keep saying mother and not parents, because I don't know where their dads are. They're equally accountable because they didn't do shit either. So you have these mothers who auditioned their preteens to be a part of this creation house. They saw this kid who was doing really well and successful, and they wanted their kids to go into acting or whatever. So they were like, hey, this is a good opportunity. Let's get my kid in here. So they would audition to be a part of the squad. And these parents also had like so little clue about what YouTube actually is. Like, they went into this, they didn't know what YouTube was or how it worked or anything. Like, they knew so little about it, and they did not care to ever look into it. And I think that if you know, are putting your kid into work when they are 12 years old, you should maybe know what they're getting into. You should probably look into what that means. So already, red flag number one is they don't even know the industry they are putting their kid into. They just know it'll get them attention and money. And then upon their kid getting accepted into this squad, into this position, into this job, they are signing their kids up to do 14 hours of work every single day, and not just like normal work, which would be bad enough, but they are signing up for their kids to be putting themselves on the internet for millions of people to watch that is completely unfiltered every single day, and are still sitting here and acting as though they are victims, acting as though they are good parents who never made a bad decision. But like, you know, it seems blatantly obvious to me that you cannot be a good parent if you sign your kids up to do that. You are a bad parent. There is no if, buts, or maybes about it. You're sending your kid to work for 14 hours a day, you're a bad parent. You're doing anything that means your 12, 13-year-old, 14-year-old child is getting home at 2 o'clock in the morning every day. If your kid is only getting 3 hours of sleep a night, you're doing something wrong. But hey, their kids are making money, which is them making money, obviously, because there are no regulations around who gets to keep and spend the money when it comes to influencing. These parents can keep 100% of that money if they want to. There's absolutely no rule around that. So why would they care about the well-being of their child if they're making money? And they can sit here and convince themselves it's what their kids want to do. The kids are telling them that's what they want to do. So it's easy to turn a blind eye and go, okay, it's what they want. No matter what their best interest actually is, because, you know, as a parent, your job is to look after your kids' health and safety. And that's not always what they want. You're not going to let your kid eat ice cream 3 meals a day, every single day, because that's bad for them. That's what they want. It makes them happy, but you are an adult and you are meant to help them make good decisions and help them do what is going to be best for them, their well-being. And that means not letting them eat ice cream 3 times a day. Just like they can sit here and be like, but I want to film videos. You say no, because this isn't healthy. And I also don't think that's true. They talked about the fact they witnessed these kids several times crying about how they didn't want to film anymore. They were crying and being like, I don't want to do this today. I don't want to be here. I'm sick of it. I'm not having a good time. And still, they kept them there because they wanted to be there. And that includes one of the other things they talked about in this docuseries was some of the content that they filmed, other than, you know, the crush content, which their parents are also seemingly totally okay with, is prank videos. And not just like silly little fun prank videos. No, we all know what YouTube prank videos are. And, you know, they always seemed so fake. Like, so many of the pranks you see on YouTube are so very, very fake. But in the squad, they weren't. These pranks were laid out by Tiffany and Hunter where not everyone was in on it. So the ones being pranked were not told that there was anything happening. And this could be anything from telling all the kids to be mean to one person in particular. So ignoring them, not wishing them happy birthday, just being straight up mean and like bullying them and not telling them why it was happening, and obviously that really hurting their feelings. There was also instances of like, these pranks got so extreme. They would like go for a walk and one of them collapsed and pretended to have like a stroke and break her leg, and they hired an ambulance to come in with the sirens blaring and carry her on like a stretcher to the ambulance. And these kids are like crying because they're traumatized because they just watched this happen to their friend. And then, nope, never mind, it's a prank. So there were no lines. And I cannot imagine the psychological torment of that, to where you have to completely live your life on edge. You can never be comfortable because you never know when something is going to happen. Your friend could drop to the ground and you won't know whether it's a prank or whether it's real. Anything could happen and you have no way of knowing if it's real or not. We all learned The Boy Who Cried Wolf when we were children. We learned the moral of that story being like, if you fake something enough times, people aren't going to believe you and then you're actually going to get hurt. And here are these adults forcing their kids to do this time and time over, to the point where like, it's honestly so impressive and like admirable that they carried on believing it every time that it happened because they didn't want to be wrong. And at the same time, it also sucks that they carried on believing it because it meant that they had to go through that psychological torment every single time. And I cannot imagine anything worse. Like, blurring the lines between like reality in such a horrific way is so devastating. Keeping in mind, once again, all of these parents were watching this take place. They were there when this happened. One instance in particular that they talked about was this arresting prank. They hired an actor who was dressed as a police officer who came in a cop car and came and arrested one of the kids. None of the kids knew, none of the parents knew, and they were so distressed. These kids are having panic attacks. They are freaking out. They are sobbing. They are so clearly incredibly emotionally distressed. And the parents in this documentary were being like, it was so horrible. Tiffany is so cruel. She set up this prank and we had no idea. We watched the psychological toll it took on our children. They were there and they were screaming and they were crying. And yet nothing changed. These mothers sit here this entire fucking time talking about how horrible it was, how much of a monster this woman was, the psychological damage that was being done to their children, the way their kids were being used and manipulated, and how they were like miserable so often. There were predators who were watching and they were being made to sexualize these kids and look at these thumbnails. And they did nothing. They sat here in front of these cameras, sharing all of this, crying about it, talking about how horrible it was. Meanwhile, they literally kept their kids in that environment. They never even tried to take them out. Some of them didn't even have contracts, by the way. Some of them were not here by contractual requirement. They were just there. And even if there were contracts, I think that it would be absolutely worth breaking a contract in order to get your kid out of that situation and just pay whatever fucking money they demand for it. But I don't even think there were any contracts that were keeping them there. There was a slow start to people leaving, and there was no legal repercussions for that, right? Like, these parents have had the ability to pull their kids out anytime that they wanted. They could have taken their kids and gone whenever they felt they needed to, which, to be honest, should have happened before they even signed up. The moment you are told, I need your kid here 14 hours a day, is the moment you say, absolutely the fuck not, go to hell. But you know, it's not what happened, obviously, and these kids were making good money, so they're not going to pull them out, are they? Because why would they do that? If they pulled their kids out, they would have to go back to work. Why would they want to do that? They could just keep living their life off of their children's money. Because isn't that so much nicer than having to be an adult and provide for your family like an adult should? When kids did start leaving, when parents did eventually finally start pulling their kids out, after literal years of this happening, the response was a smear campaign. It was, they left and then they were cut off completely. Tiffany made the remaining members of the squad make a video being like, we're really hurt that she left. We're gonna now publicly unfollow and block her on social media, and you should all do the same. It was, you know, encouraging all of their audience to go unfollow them, unsubscribe, etc. And so these kids who left have now been cut off from their friends, and thus also the only people who understood their situation and what they had gone through. So that must have been difficult. And on top of that, obviously, it meant that a ton of hate was now being directed their way. It was largely children who consumed this content were now being told, like, this person left, this person, you know, has hurt us. And so they take that, they go to these other kids and they start posting on all of their other social medias, commenting on their videos, sending them DMs, whatever, and sort of just talking about like how much bad people they are, how upset they are, how like, you know, I hate you, you were just ripping them off, you were using them, how dare you, etc. Like sending them just nasty messages and leaving nasty comments. And this was the reason that parents didn't want to pull their kids out to begin with. Like every single time these parents were sort of like talking about not wanting to get on Tiffany's bad side and not wanting to leave, it was specifically like we didn't want to leave because we didn't want to be our kids to be punished. Like we didn't want our kids to be cut off from the other videos. We wanted them to continue to be allowed to be in Piper's videos. We wanted attention to still go on their videos. If they stepped out of line, then they wouldn't be able to have any videos made for a couple of weeks. Like ultimately that is what kept them there for so long, was the fact that they wanted to keep making content with the rest of the squad. Not the kids, the parents. The parents wanted their kids to keep making content here. And they didn't want to leave because they didn't want to lose that, because obviously, you know, their children's careers are more important than their health and well-being. We can't be having these kids losing followers. We can't be having these kids getting less engagement. That would be a tragedy. Our 12-year-old's career ending? Life ruining. Our 14-year-old is no longer going to be the sole provider for our family? What a tragedy. Obviously, I feel for these kids. The kids who left and were blocked by all of their previous friends, like that must be incredibly difficult. These are the only people in the world who understand their experience. They've been together for such a long time. They have suffered together for such a long time, and now they have lost them. They don't have other friends. They don't have a life outside of this. This has been their entire lives. They have been sort of like broken down into nothing but people who can create content because they were never allowed to actually be people. They lived on camera. They lived making content for other people and providing for other people. Like that was the life that was forced upon them for so long. And now they've been cut off. And on top of that, obviously they were being attacked by thousands of people online, which is incredibly difficult to go through, especially when you're a child. Like receiving like death threats and people just hating you and throwing vile stuff at you is really difficult. And when you're a kid, that must be so hard to see. Now, I would love to say that these parents, you know, went and deleted their kids' social media accounts. I would love to sit here and say that the parents took down their kids' Instagrams, they took down their TikTok accounts, they removed their YouTube channels, they did all the steps required. They like made their kids get off social media, helped shield them from this shit that was being thrown at them because, you know, that's their job as parents, to protect their children. And, you know, realizing that their kids spending their lives in front of a camera online is like not good for them and their mental health. And maybe they need some time to just, you know, recover and be kids. But unfortunately, I can't tell you that that's what happened because it absolutely is not what happened. These parents actually continue to encourage their children to make content. These kids left the squad and were still making YouTube videos. They are still posting on Instagram, on TikTok. They were not encouraged to take a break, or if they were encouraged to take a break, it was not enforced. So they were seeing all of this hate that was being thrown at them. They didn't have anywhere to hide from it. Their parents were not shielding them from it. They were actively encouraging them to be online and in the environment where it was being hurled at them. And because of this smear campaign that was being run against them and for other factors as well, their channels hit a wall where they were initially gaining like thousands and thousands of subscribers like every single day. Suddenly they were barely gaining any. Their views were really low. They were not seeing much of anything. They weren't getting very much engagement. They weren't getting very many views, very many subscribers, and thus the amount of money they were bringing in was significantly lower. And this, my friends, is where the lawsuit comes in. Yep. Yeah, not the, you know, sexual exploitation or the being worked for 14 hours a day, not the psychological torment that these kids were under. None of that warranted for a lawsuit or even for any confrontation for that matter. However, these channels no longer making tens of thousands of dollars every single month, that is grounds for a lawsuit. This is a $22 million civil lawsuit that was filed at the start of 2022. It was filed by a group of mothers of the collective 11 children who were previous members of the squad. The core of this lawsuit is that these children were taken advantage of for years whilst being part of the squad for the benefit of Tiffany, the company, and Hunter. Also that during this time, they were subjected to physical, emotional, verbal, financial, and sometimes even sexual abuse. I sat down and I read through the entire lawsuit and it was something, to say the least. It made me so mad for so many reasons. And so I wanted to pick it apart with you a little bit because there is so much that needs to be said about this lawsuit and the motivations behind it. And there's so much more of me wanting to just yell at these mothers. So we're going to be doing that. Let's have a look at the lawsuit. Let's have some yelling. My first problem with the lawsuit is that it so heavily revolves around finances. It leaves out so many important factors of the abuse that these kids faced. Like, they liked to sit down in this documentary and initially they tried to like portray it as, you know, they filed this lawsuit just to, you know, bring awareness to the situation and get justice for their kids. Because that's what they told their kids. That's what their kids wanted out of the lawsuit, is they wanted justice. They wanted to share this story. They wanted to get some sort of sense of justice out of it. Whereas the parents later on in the docuseries admitted to the fact that this lawsuit was indeed only filed once their kids' channel stopped performing so well. So, you know, we can't really be surprised, but it's still so upsetting to see that, you know, the opening statement of this lawsuit speaks about, like, you know, our kids went through all of this abuse and it's terrible, and then followed by they were taking advantage of our kids and money, and they were taking more money than they deserved, and how dare they. And throughout the entire lawsuit, it goes back to money so much more than it does to anything else at any point. And they also leave out a lot of stuff that the kids themselves mentioned in this documentary that the parents, surprisingly, did not, which I think is really upsetting. But, you know, we can't really be surprised considering everything we have talked about so far of, like, they were aware of everything that was happening and still kept their kids there because of the money. So who's shocked? One of the things that spoke the most to me about this lawsuit, in the way that, like, these parents do not understand how YouTube works and did not ever care to look into it, therefore didn't really know that much about the situation they were putting their kids into. They didn't know what the industry was like. They didn't know what to expect. They didn't know what was normal. They knew nothing and they never looked into it. And that is confirmed by, like, a portion of the introduction to the lawsuit that reads, "Plaintiffs were never compensated by defendants, despite the fact that their contributions, including the use of their names, images, and likeness on Piper's YouTube channel, generated significant revenue for defendants, oftentimes upwards of several $100,000 per month. On the other hand, plaintiffs were usually charged several $100s per month by defendant Mr. Hill for various editing and cinematography services provided to the plaintiffs for use of their creative content on their own respective YouTube channels." And it's like, yeah, because that's how this works. I'm so confused as to why this is such a big part of this lawsuit when this is, like, the least important part of literally everything that happened, because this is just what a collaboration is. This is how it works. You don't split the money you make by featuring on someone else's channel. That's not how this has ever worked. If your kids are getting the money they earned from their own channels, then this was fair. Like, in the sense of, like, this is how it works. Like, were they all putting in equal amount of hours? Mostly, yes. There was a varying number of, like, some kids were in Piper's videos like 100 times and others like 20. So there's a bit of difference in there. But they were all worked to the bone. Way too much. Absolutely. Is it fair that others made more than others? Not necessarily. I mean, I understand that it's upsetting when, like, you all work the same and someone earns more, but that is just the way it works. And especially when, like, you're coming from a place being like, they spent so much time on Piper's channel and Piper was earning all of this money because my kids were on their channel and never received compensation. The compensation they received was the fact that they have over 1 million subscribers now, which they would not have gotten if they did not come in here and join Piper. If they did not feature on her channel, they would not have gotten those subscribers. Their channel would be earning nothing. So already all the money that you are receiving from their channel is money that you have earned largely because of her. You know, like, the only way this could work would be that if all of the money went into one big AdSense account and bank account was separated equally, but then you'd have to, like, divide it based on who did how many videos on every channel. The easiest way to do it is the way that it's always been done by everyone, in which you get the money from your channel. That's how it goes. If I did a collaboration with someone and their video got 2 million views and my video got 50K views, obviously they earned a fuckload more money than I did. But that's not my money because they generated the views. I got possibly some subscribers from there. And if I didn't, then it just didn't work from my behalf. That's just how it works. That's from their channel. That's their money. They got more views. I'm not entitled to that money. Can it be a bit frustrating? It's like, damn, I wish my video did a bit better. That would be nice. Sure. But I'm aware that that's not how this works. And to think about it as well in different terms is they say this, but I am so sure that they would not want to split the earnings from their kids' channel with any of the others. They're only saying it because, you know, it benefits them because Piper is making more money than anyone else, which I understand, wealth imbalance, etc. I'm not a fan of capitalism or anything either, all right? I'm just explaining how it works. But like, in saying this, I'm sure if then they were brought back with like, okay then, take your income and split it with everyone else who has been in your videos, they probably wouldn't want to do that. And yet, here we are. And on top of that, being like, Hunter took hundreds of dollars per month from our kids, and that's not fair. Bro, yes it is. Because he was planning videos, he was filming the videos, he was editing the videos. That's a job. Your kid wouldn't have been able to have any videos at all without the work that he was doing. You have to pay people who are working for you. You pay editors, you pay videographers, you pay. That's what that was. You were just paying him because he was doing a service. Like, he's not a good person, and I'm not defending him as a person, but he was entitled to that money. So this being such a big part of the lawsuit, I would imagine speaks really largely into the fact that the lawsuit did not go as it should have, because it was a bit of a shitty lawsuit, because they don't know anything, and they neglected so much in order to make them look less guilty as parents. Unfortunately, it wasn't until the lawsuit was filed that they finally started to pull more information out of their kids. They had, up until this point, neglected to ask questions and find out more information about the abuse that took place in this house, probably just out of, you know, blissful ignorance and not really wanting to acknowledge it, so never asking until they really legally had to do so. It was during this time where they discovered that these kids were being sexually abused. It is laid out in the lawsuit, in the document, a lot of examples of what they went through. I didn't feel the need to read all of that. It's too personal. That's not for me. But it recounted details of inappropriate touching, inappropriate suggestions, comments, and things that were being said and done that were sexual in nature and absolutely not okay, both being done by Tiffany and by Hunter, but by Tiffany primarily. She was just saying and doing some incredibly inappropriate stuff. And this was going on for years. Like, the entire time these kids spent in this house, this was happening. And they didn't tell anyone because, you know, kids often don't come forwards about these sorts of things. This is something that is known because this is an adult. This is someone that they trust because you trust adults. You do what adults tell you. This adult is charged with their care. And if it makes them feel uncomfortable or upset, they think that that's their own problem and they're embarrassed or ashamed to share it. So they kept it to themselves for all of this time. And it's so upsetting because firstly, they should not have had to go through that at all. And secondly, there is no way their parents didn't know this was happening, right? They may not have known explicitly everything that was going on. They may not have been aware that these kids were being inappropriately touched or, you know, the extent to which this took place. But they had to have been suspicious, right? They knew these kids were being taken advantage of and they knew they were being sexualized because they were the ones who was being told to make them look sluttier. They were aware of what the thumbnails were. They were aware of what the content was. They were aware of the fact that there was a predator who had a direct line to these kids. They were told that Tiffany was selling her child's underwear to old men. They had all of the signs. They knew that Tiffany was sexualizing these kids. She literally said to them, "Sex sells," when referring to a group of preteens. And these parents kept them in this house and didn't ask either, by the way. And then when their kids sat down and confided in them, they were like, "Oh my God, this is heartbreaking. This is painful. You know, it was my job as a parent to protect you and I did a shit job." Do not sit here and act like the victim. Do not sit here and act like you couldn't have done anything to stop them. Do not sit here and act as though you did not put your kids directly in harm's way. The only reason you didn't know this was happening was because you refused to ask. The first time you asked them, the first time you sat down and was like, "Did she do anything inappropriate?" They told you. You had all the information. You knew for a fact that Piper was being taken advantage of, but you never asked. And the reason you never asked is because you didn't want to know. Because once you knew, you would have had no excuse but to pull them out, and that would have meant bye-bye money, bye-bye career for your children, and you didn't want that. So you let it continue, pretending that you didn't know so you could play the ignorance card. You don't get to fucking do that. There were even times, actually, where, like, the mothers were present during the filming, right? They never explicitly straight up said they were present during the filming, but they mentioned a few times that mothers were chaperones and that, like, they were around for some of the prank videos that took place. So I know for a fact that parents were there, and they at some point mentioned that there came a time where Tiffany didn't want the mothers around so much. Sometimes there were days where she didn't want the mothers to watch the content. She didn't want them there. So she sent them to a separate house. She sent them to the house out back so that she could have the kids alone and film them. So these mothers, one, watched the content that was being made. They watched their kids being forced to kiss each other when they didn't really want to. They watched them being told to show more skin. They watched them being psychologically tormented by these pranks. They watched them cry over not wanting to do it anymore. They watched them, like, not be fed and be worked to the bone. And then they also walked away and left them completely unsupervised with a 20-something-year-old man and a woman that you know actively sexualizes your children. And they still sit here and play the victim. They still sit here and say they didn't know. How were they supposed to know? One of the other infuriating parts about this lawsuit and these parents, because they continuously just keep getting worse and worse, is that nowhere in the lawsuit did it mention the working conditions. Most of this lawsuit revolved entirely around the financial situation. It revolved around how their kids weren't paid fairly because they weren't paid for the content they made on Piper's channel. And it talked about how their subscriber count and their view count dropped since leaving the house. It focused on, you know, the fact that they faced this sexual abuse, which is terrible and absolutely does deserve to be talked about, although I think that should be in a criminal case, not a civil law case, but I don't know enough about law to know what that would have looked like or what you need in order to make that happen. But me personally, I think that more belongs in criminal court. And the fact that this is all in a civil lawsuit, I think also speaks volumes about the way this is all so financially revolved, and especially because they did leave out so much about the abuse. Like the work days, the 14-hour work days where they were barely fed, and the fact that these kids weren't in school, that wasn't anywhere in the lawsuit. It wasn't mentioned at all. They talked about how their kids, they suffered from some like emotional abuse that took place, but they didn't go into specifics about what that actually meant. It was mentioned in like 1 or 2 paragraphs in the like full 40-page document. It was such like a fleeting thing that they seemed to just kind of throw in there and not care about anywhere near as much as the like 25 pages of shit about money. Yeah, they never mentioned the working conditions. They also didn't talk about that in the documentary. The only people who talked about how hard it was to work in this house were the kids. One of the kids mentioned that, you know, she only got 3 hours of sleep a night. She had to do 3 hours of school. She was there for 14 hours. She is the one who mentioned that. She was talking about how they had to clean the house at night and she passed out at the top of the stairs because of bleach fumes in the house. Like, the parents neglected to talk about that because obviously they signed up for their kids to do it. And once again, they don't want to take accountability for that. Because as soon as they admit to the fact they signed up to put their kids in that working condition, they're the bad guys. So they didn't include it in the lawsuit because that means, you know, not only admitting to themselves that that was a bad thing to do, but it's admitting to their kids that they were at fault for this. It's admitting to the court and the public that they were at fault for this. So anything that they had direct knowledge of and took part in was left out. It was left out. The only stuff that was included in that lawsuit was stuff that they were not there for. Because if they were there to witness it, suddenly they're bad guys. But like what they don't realize is that we know Yeah, you can sit here and play victim all you fucking want. No matter what, we know your kids did not finish work until 2 o'clock in the fucking morning and instantly you're a bad parent. There are so many factors here as to why all of these mothers and absent fathers fucking suck. Like, I don't have enough fingers and toes to count the reasons I hate these people, but I only need to have that one piece, which they knew before going into the situation, in order to decide that they're bad people. Along with this, and to really aid in the point I just made here, one of the parents said something that made me so fucking mad. And that is, we didn't pursue this lawsuit to change the industry, but to bring awareness that predators can be found in any field. This was about holding the person who harmed our kids accountable. Because of course, being a child influencer, that's fine. That's great. What a good opportunity. What a valid career path. We should be putting our preteens and teenagers and children into situations where they're working 14 hours a fucking day. As long as the person who is in charge of that isn't, like sexually abusing them, then it's fine. A different person can be in charge of the kids working 14 hours a day. We don't want to change the industry. The industry is fine. We just don't want bad people running it. Like, I think my kid should still be an influencer. I actually really want him to continue doing this because I think it's a really great path, and I don't want to take any responsibility or accountability for the part that I have played in this because I actually think that is a really, really good thing to be doing. We just wanted to let you know that there are predators in the children's entertainment industry. Because no one's ever said that before. This is actually the first time anyone has ever brought attention to the fact that there are predators in children's entertainment. No one's ever said it before, right? No one knew that. Who would have fucking thought that there are predators in an industry that is full of children, especially one where there are literally no rules and regulations? Like, you do not need a lawsuit to tell us that, because it's been very, very well documented forever. Like, since the beginning of the entertainment industry, this has been a problem that is constantly being reported on. Don't sit here and act as though you are shocked. You are shocked that there are abusers in this industry. Fuck all the way off. Saying this statement is acting as though this lawsuit was, just to speak out and educate people, when obviously that's not true, because, we're all very aware, and everyone with a single functioning brain cell that actually cares about their children would have considered that before going into this, and would have vetted the process and the people whose houses they're being sent to, and also, would have pulled their kids out the second they showed any sign of abuse, or, the second they tell you to sign a contract to go to work for 14 hours a day. I don't even remember where I started with that. Yeah, so obviously it's not actually about raising awareness for there being predators in this industry, because we all been new, these parents included. It was entirely about money. And that it was entirely about money because this was a $22 million lawsuit and they settled for $1.2 million. Granted, a little bit of a shitty lawsuit, as established. There are a lot of holes in it and they left out a lot of information that I think could have actually made it a very good lawsuit. But again, they don't want to be forced to take accountability for the roles they played in their children's abuse. And also the fact that their kids really wanted this to go to court. They said this at the end of this docuseries, and me and Kat were sitting here just yelling at the screen. Like, they said at the end, they took the $1.2 million because they'd already discussed they didn't actually want to go to court. They didn't actually want to pursue it. The whole purpose of it was to just put it out there, to share their stories so that people knew, and they were just going to take whatever they were offered. That was the original intent, so that's what they did. Doesn't matter that their kids were crying about it. Doesn't matter that their kids were devastated and were begging to go to court so they could share their story and talk about what they went through and say how they were feeling and get that justice, or at the very least just feel as though they had done something to heal and to help others. But they were denied of that, so their parents could settle and take the $1.2 million, which is absolutely not enough. These parents refuse to take any accountability for the actions that they played and the abuse that their children endured, and I don't see them ever taking any accountability in it ever. And this documentary was supposed to be here telling us about the dangers of kidfluencing and the dark side of kidfluencing, and the professionals on it did a relatively good job, but they barely made appearances. And the kids did a pretty good job at, sharing their experiences and what they went through. The parents, however, sucked real bad, and I hate them. They just came across as jealous assholes who hate their kids because that's what they are. It ended up with them, these mothers, sitting here being like, I know that everyone watching this is going to be like, why did you keep your kids there so long? How could you do that? I would have pulled my kids out immediately. And they're like, I know that's what you're saying because that's what I would be saying too. But you have to understand, we were manipulated. It was like a cult. We were brought into this and brainwashed and manipulated. And I'm sorry. No, I'm not. But no. Adults can be manipulated. Absolutely. Adults can be gaslit. They can be manipulated and groomed and brought into cults. And that is something that does happen. That is something that can happen. Absolutely. However, this is not one of those times. You cannot sit here and try to remove all accountability from yourself by being like, Tiffany was a bad person and I was manipulated. Fuck off. They sat here being like, she was lovely. She was a great person. She I was so happy when I met her. I had a friend in her. And then now she's turned into this monster. Any person that tells you that you need to bring your kid to them and leave them unattended for 14 hours until 2 o'clock in the morning is a bad person. And you knew that before anything else happened. Before anything else happened, you had that information. There was no time for her to manipulate you into thinking that that was okay. You went into it immediately thinking that was okay. And even if you went into it and initially the days weren't that long, even if initially the days were only a few hours long, if she is sexualizing your kids and she is forcing them to work till 3 a.m, you take your kids and you fucking leave. You are not manipulated to the point where you know that that's not okay and that you can do something about it, especially when the manipulation tactic is saying that I won't let her be in videos anymore if you do that. If you leave, then I'm gonna ruin your career. If you take her, then the career of your 12-year-old is going to be over. No, I'm sorry. Then you ruin the career of that 12-year-old because 12-year-olds don't need a fucking career. The second any harm is coming to your child, you take your kid and you fucking leave. You are not manipulated into this situation. Don't fucking bullshit me. Don't sit here and play victim. These kids did not need careers. They did not need YouTube channels. They did not need to be earning money. You could have stopped and left and let all of that go and it would have been fine. The fact that the reason you didn't take your kids out is because you were worried about their careers is deplorable because these kids don't need careers. What they need is to be children. But they had their entire childhood taken away from them. They were never given an opportunity to have a normal childhood again. They were eventually taken out of this abusive situation after several years. And then, the correct call of action should have been to remove all of their social media accounts and have them not be on social media at all until they were adults. These kids could have said, but I want to, but I love it, but I want to keep doing it. Doesn't matter. You're the fucking parent. They're not allowed to be on social media anymore. They need to cleanse of that and have a normal life where they go and make friends and go to school and just do kid things. And then when they're an adult, maybe they can make that decision for themselves if it's something they want to do again. But you never allowed them the time to have a break. You never allowed them to step back from that. You never allowed them to figure out if this is something that they actually want to do or if it's the only thing they know how to do. And they spent all these formative years of their childhood being told by other adults that their worth depended on the amount of content they create. It depended on the amount of views they could get. They put their self-worth in numbers online and how many strangers pay attention to them. You never made them step away and reflect on that. They may be in a better place now. They may be less on social media now, and that's good, but they never got a full break from it. And I think that was so needed. And I think it's incredibly selfish that these parents didn't enforce that on these kids. And I just think that it needed to be enforced, and these kids needed an opportunity to grow away from the internet. And the fact that that is not something that was given to them is really upsetting. And like some of them, yeah, did decide to step away, but some of them did decide to keep going, obviously, because now we have this lawsuit which centers around the fact that these kids wanted to keep going. And I just really wish that these parents cared enough about their kids to force them off of social media for a period of time. Because sometimes you have to make your kids unhappy to make them happy. It's all that they know, and they deserve to know themselves away from the public eye. There needs to be change that happens within this industry, within influencing, if you can call it that, and like within YouTube, etc., because there are no rules and regulations, there are no laws around it, and there really has to be, but people just don't take it seriously. It's been years now and people still refuse to take it seriously and to look at it as actual labor, despite all of this evidence stacking up that it is. There have been so many court cases about it. There have been so many documented moments of abuse and exploitation, etc. And yet very little is being done to change the way that this industry works to protect children. People are fueled by money and greed and power, and they do not care who they have to hurt in order to achieve that. And children are very easy targets. They're an easy demographic to appeal to. And so children will continue to be taken advantage of and abused as long as it means that, you know, grown-ups get their money and no one can do anything about it because it's legal. You can do that. You can do whatever the fuck you want. And you don't even have to share a percentage of that with your kids. It doesn't even have to go in a trust fund or anything. These kids are treated like accessories and just little tools that are used to make money and not as people. People love to pretend that kids are not people, and there's no one fighting for them, or there are very few people who are actually fighting for them, and it's so upsetting. The squad obviously disbanded a few years back when this lawsuit started happening, and they've all gone on in sort of varying different paths, with a lot of them still doing social media, unfortunately. Mostly, I believe, away from Tiffany, but still they've spent their entire lives on camera and they are continuing to be on camera, which is upsetting. And Piper is still obviously living with her mother and under her mom's influence. She is 17 presently. She turns 18 in August. I, along with many others, are incredibly worried for her and about her, because we obviously have all this information about her mother and the situation that she is in, and there's nothing really anyone can do. CPS was called one time, but obviously they have a lot of money and live in a big house and they are white, so nothing was done. It was like, oh, this kid's well cared for, look at this nice fancy house and all the money, carry on. And they left because, of course, that's the way it always goes. Piper is very obviously being taken advantage of and is being exploited in a lot of ways that are incredibly inappropriate and not okay. And I am going to be talking more about that in next week's video. If you want to see more about that and talk about that a bit more, then tune back in next week for that. But ultimately, in response to this lawsuit, she was saying, you know, like, if you attack my mother, you're attacking me because she's all that I have. And that was just such a heartbreaking thing to hear, because like all that does is just enforce the idea that her mother is abusive because she has no one else. She's been isolated. She's been made to think that her mom is the only one who cares for her. And that's also kind of true, because she's never had anyone else in her life, and everyone else who has come in, like all the other adults who have come in, have left, and they have left her there. She has never had anyone in her corner. She does only have her mother, and her mother uses her and exploits her, but also obviously love bombs her as well. And this is the only thing that she's ever known. And so she is here, and attacks on her mom do affect her. And it's just so horrible and heartbreaking to see. And there's a lot more that I think needs to be said about their relationship, and also how it's reflected in other people's relationships with their kids and the type of content they do, etc. And so again, I will be talking about that next week. If you want to see more about that, don't forget to hit subscribe. I would love to see child influencers just kind of stop, you know? I think that we need to end them completely. I don't think we have a need for it. I think that kids need to be less online. I personally am not against like teenagers on social media. Social media for me as a teenager was a refuge. It was a really helpful place for me to be. I was in like fandom spaces, you know, I found like a lot of like-minded people. I connected with people on things. I had a lot of friends online where I didn't have very many friends in my life, and social media like really helped me grow and as a person and like kept me alive essentially. So I'm not against kids on social media as long as that is like limited, you know what I mean? It's not being broadcast to everyone and it's not being monetized. I think ultimately we need to stop the monetization of children's social media. I think that you shouldn't be able to earn money from kids because that's ultimately what is incentivizing these parents. If you take away the monetization factor, then parents aren't going to be forcing their kids to do it. So I think YouTube needs to not monetize videos made by kids. And I think that brands need to not work with children. You shouldn't be able to sponsor a child. And I think that really needs to happen because as soon as it does, the only videos kids are going to be posting are going to be videos that kids want to post. And I think that there needs to be some talk around that and like safety online and the availability of videos to the wider world, etc. That needs to be a conversation as well. But like one step at a time. Definitely get rid of the monetization of kids content because I think that that's incredibly important and will so greatly diminish the amount of kids who are being abused in this industry for the sake of content and money. I really do hope we start seeing changes within this industry soon. Already there have been a few laws passed in a few states in the US that are trying to bring in some regulations for child influencers, but it is very slow moving and it is not in very many places yet. So people are just, you know, moving from California to Texas or wherever else because most places do not have any regulations in place. So hopefully we see that change soon and hopefully these kids are able to start being kids. I hope we see a decrease in kids online and I hope that, you know, parents can be good parents. There are so many bad parents out there. So many parents who don't deserve to have kids and shouldn't and do, and it's so upsetting. Hopefully change happens. A massive thank you to my Kiwi Cat patrons. Stella, Trippy Day 27, Bay the Trucker, Chastity, Beckett, Prismatic PT, LJ James D, MA Ping the Games, Blaze, Uh-Oh It's Craiglow, Phil the Duck, Jessie A, River, Queen Glimmer, Ella, Lady Nutbar, Mr. Noodle, Radsack, Knitting Menace, Samuel, Chris, Ellie, Alexis, and Bobby. I love and appreciate you so, so much. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Keep fighting. I love you. Mwah.